Hey there, friends, and welcome to Montessori 101, a live show from Child of the Redwoods, all about the magic of Montessori. We believe that every child deserves a Montessori education. I'm Aubrey Hargis.
And I'm David Hargis. So whether you're watching us live or maybe you're watching the replay, maybe you're listening to a podcast, whichever it is, we don't care. We're just happy to have you with us. And if you want to know more about our work, you can get us on the internet at childoftheredwoods.com.
Yes. So today we are actually kicking off a brand new series. We just wrapped up our Montessori Essentials series, although the Essentials list is still on our website.
Of course,
so
yeah.
You're welcome to go download the list of Montessori Essentials at Child of the Redwoods /essentials.
Mm-hmm.
But today's episode is really about some awesome lessons.
That's right.
So we figure we've talked a lot about the materials themselves.
Yep.
And so now we're going to kind of deep dive into the curriculum, give you a little peek of what we do at Child of the Redwoods, and also hopefully inspire you to do some of these lessons at home with your children.
That's right.
Yeah.
So just like with the essentials, where, as is our approach, we are focusing on DIY or home-friendly things to do. So we'll show you some homemade materials, or we'll give you tips along the way over the course of the series. And today we're kicking it off with our first awesome lesson, living and non-living.
Yeah. Living and non-living. So that is the lesson that we're discussing today. Should we get into it?
I love it. What a great, that's the transition for an age. Yeah, for sure.
Okay. So what we're going to do is David is going to actually open this lesson up in our life science lessons and activities guide.
Right. That's right.
And he's going to show you where it is. So we are looking at, this is actually, so life science includes what we've got: botany,
zoology, botany, and living organisms.
We've got a whole section on living organisms. So this is in the section on living organisms. We've got some level 1 activities, some level 2 activities, and some level 3 activities.
That's right.
And where is this living, non-living lesson located?
Well, we would say living, non-living is an activity for primary. So you will find it in this for kids who are, roughly 2 to 5.5 is what we would consider the primary age. So we've organized it under life science. It's one of the 10 core curricular areas is life science. And I was just going to actually show you how we describe it, the lesson here in our material. Yeah, so it's here under Level 2, we'll talk about what that means in just a second, but classifying living and non-living, examine an assortment of living organisms and non-living objects.
Okay.
They can be real items or photos of them.
Mm-hmm.
Have a conversation about whether they breathe, eat, and reproduce. Sort them into 2 rows, living and non-living.
All right, so very easy, classic sorting activity, right?
That's right.
Yeah. All right. So we've talked a little bit about the levels. This is a level 2. So what I wanted to highlight is that our levels are actually kind of scaffolded. So we're just picking the level 2 activity, but that means that something has happened first in level 1
exactly
to prepare us for level 2. Can you go back into living organisms level 1?
Sure.
And see if we can find out what comes first.
Right. And the reason this is important is that we say primary, so is for ages 2.5 to about almost 6.
Mm-hmm.
So it's roughly toddlers, pre-kindergartners, kindergartners.
Yeah, kindergarten.
So, but we don't have grade levels. We don't do grades, and human development is not precise. So just because somebody is age 4 doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to be doing the living and non-living. Rather, what we're interested in is prior knowledge and following knowledge. So we're trying to get a sense of what kinds of things would a child already know that would show readiness. So in this case, we'd be looking for things like, and I'm just going to our little booklet here, identifying living organisms. Taking a sensory walk and listening to the birds, touching a cat's fur, smelling flowers, tasting rosemary. And every time you come across one, deciding whether it was living or not living. And then, of course, all these things are living, petting the cat and so forth. And then giving a definition. What is a living
Mhm.
thing? It's something that we would say here. It breathes, eats, and reproduces.
Yeah. So what comes first is that sensory impression,
Right.
right? And so we're really trying to help the child learn, just what this whole concept of a living organism is. Hopefully, understanding that they themselves are a living organism,
Exactly.
right? Yeah. So, we study these things not just in the early childhood years. We actually study them as a field, just in general life,
Yeah, that's
right?
exactly right. Because at the end of the day, what we're really looking to do is give the child a first experience. And again, sensorially for the very littles, and then you building on that sensorial to a more conceptual idea of something as living like a cat and non-living like a rock,
Right.
and um, getting them to kind of match the sensorial to the non-sensorial through that journey. But then they're going to eventually build further, right? So even in college, if you study botany, you're going to be exploring the concept of living and non-living and what is the structure or what makes something a living organism. So we've given a simple definition that a child would understand, but you would actually grow from there. So that's why life science is one of the 10 core subject areas, because we would consider it a foundational academic area for, a human life.
Yes. Okay. So there are these characteristics of life
Yeah.
that some of you probably remember from your biology class or maybe your life science class back in middle school. Maria Montessori believed that we could actually teach these high level concepts, these big vocabulary words to very, very small children. And that just
That's
because
right.
your child is 3 years old does not mean that they can't, understand some of these bigger concepts that are going on, as long as they have concrete objects to represent those concepts with, and or like pictures, right?
Exactly.
So there are some classic characteristics of life. So let's kind of go through some of those and remind our friends about the introduction to biology that they
Yes.
may have
And
taken back in school, because this is really like the core of like what we're trying to teach children.
And let's do it from the perspective of a parent walking through the woods. And as you think about these different characteristics, how you might exemplify that in nature, right? Since that's sort of where we're going to start. We're going to start with a sensorial experience. So one is that a um, living things respond to stimuli.
Okay.
So how would you might, we're walking through the woods. So you might show a flower turn toward the sun.
All right. We're walking through the woods and um, some, I see some leaves waving in the wind. Is that the same?
Oh, good question. Is it responding to stimuli? Hmm.
So it gets kind of complicated a little bit fast, right?
That's right.
It's this is an investigative type of work that we're doing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or how about a rock? I was thinking a rock that has moss on it,
Hmm.
right? The moss is going to grow in relation to the sun, but it lives on the rock. It could be confusing to a child. Is the rock also part of the moss?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, one needs the other. So these are the kind. There's no answer to this.
No.
But what we're wanting to teach them is that living things respond to stimuli. So another example of that would be when your pupil gets larger or smaller, when you go into a brighter or darker, or you salivate because you're hungry. Right? These are things that your body is naturally doing. All living things will have some kind of stimuli, including plants, which will turn will turn to face the flower will turn to face the direction of the sun, and that's different than the wind moving an object, because in that case it's the wind that's moving the leaves, not the leaves that are positioning to soak up those rays.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what's another quality of life?
Let's see. How about organization? Like how living creatures are organized in some way.
Okay, how would you? Here we are. We're uh, having fun. We're walking through the woods. What am I seeing around me that would help me bring this concept to life for a child?
All right. Well, I guess, part of this would be like you're looking at the plants around you and you're
Mm,
noticing that they have some kind of structure,
yeah.
and that structure is kind of consistent, and that they change, right?
Hmm.
So I'm thinking the seed grows into a seedling and then becomes a little plant and then grows into a big tree. And then that tree has to interact with the environment and is kind of organized into parts.
Yeah.
So it kind of like makes me think of like the parts of something.
Could you look at a leaf and see the veins on the leaf, and then how the veins on the leaf lead
Thank
into
you.
the stem, and then the stem into the branch, and the branch into the trunk? Would that be an example of something of an organization?
I think it could be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about if you look at a rock and you see the striations?
I mean, that's also organized.
It is,
It
but if a rock
is.
is not living.
Right. So it sounds like non-living structures are also somewhat organized.
Mm. Oh boy. Here's another one I was thinking of. All living things reproduce.
They do.
So if you were walking through the woods, you could see acorns,
Uh-huh.
right? Or if you see a fern, the spores on the bottom of the fern, which is cool because there were spores before there were seeds when we study the evolution of life on Earth, right? And that's a kind of a side lesson, depending on the age of the child, that you could get into. And of course, mammals and other um, kinds of creatures have babies. So eggs, birds lay eggs, and
Mhm.
babies pop out. Right? They reproduce. So how would you? I mean, I guess you'd just be walking around and you'd see a nut hanging off a tree and say, "There is that is a seed."
That is
And
the seed. How about if you look up in the trees and you see like a nest of little squirrel babies?
ooh,
Right.
that would be very fun.
It would. Or I'm thinking of quail because here in California we
Yes,
see like the mama quail going along and all the little baby
that's
chicks
right.
following, kind of scurrying off into the bushes. So
That's right.
there's lots of nature around that we can be talking about
And
these
it's
concepts.
finding like a baby animal can be harder in the woods, but
It's true.
seeing evidence of how plant life reproduces, whether there's spores on the bottom of a fern or the flowering component of a tree or a bush or the nut or the fruit, and talking about how that's a part of the reproductive process for a plant is there too. Now, again, if you're giving that sensorial impression, you might just have them feel the bottom of the fern and feel that it's rough
Mhm.
and say, "Oh, these are the spores. This is how you make more of these." That's why it's living. It
I can make
reproduces.
more rocks by hammering at it.
No, you can make smaller rocks. All right. So another thing about it is what? What's another one that comes to mind for you?
How we talked about how things eat.
We did not. They
All
need
right.
energy.
So yes, things need
That's
energy.
right.
So plants kind of eat sunlight,
Right.
right?
Of course,
And
humans and mammals and things
birds eat
eat.
seeds.
Right. And so we all have to consume things in order to fuel our bodies. Right. So, and we have a digestive system, that breaks down the food. So if we eat the apple, we're going to extract the nutrients. It's the same as the sun. And now for the older child, they might start to think about how all these things are fitting together. Right. Like, for example, the flower is turning to face the sun or the leaf. That's stimuli. And it's doing that in order to soak up the rays, which are part of how it will feed itself, right? It needs it for the photosynthesis in order to break down chemically, photochemically, the nutrients that make it live. And it's the same as us eating. And we talked about order, that there has to be, like when we eat, we have teeth that chopping up, and we have saliva, and we have our stomachs, and the whole 9 yards. All of that is necessary to extract those nutrients. And so that is an example of being an organized structure. And we could start to tie that together. So it could be that we start also thinking about how any one of these that I wonder, it's an I wonder question. Can you be a living organism and only have one of these qualities, or will a living organism have all of these qualities?
Well, I mean, they have all of these qualities. But non-living organisms have some of these qualities, right?
They do.
But
They
not all of
could, or
them.
they could appear to, right? Like a rock having the striations that are
I mean, they
caused.
definitely, non-living things are definitely have organization and order.
Totally. They have atomic structure, and
but they don't respond to stimuli.
they can
Generally.
appear to respond, like you said, the
Generally,
leaves blowing in the
you've
wind.
heard about these rocks that like move and science is weird, right?
Science is weird.
Science is so weird.
We're going to rename this episode "Science is Weird." It's true, though. It's amazing.
So just let's just recap. So we've got living creatures or living things in the world. They are organized. They respond to stimuli. They reproduce and make more of themselves.
Yep.
They grow and change.
Right.
Right. They need energy and get it in some way, often by eating, but sometimes by absorbing or taking things in. And did we talk about homeostasis?
No, we didn't.
Not yet. Okay. So that's a really fun word, by the way. If your child is in elementary, definitely look up the etymology for homeostasis, because what it really has to do with is like regulating oneself, kind of making sure that we, for an example, for humans, like we maintain an internal temperature that's really, really consistent.
That's right.
So our temperature is usually 98.7 degrees, but sometimes it's 97 degrees and sometimes it's 99, but like there's a very, very small range.
Yeah.
Right?
So you
go outside in 101 degree weather, your body temperature isn't just going to rise to 101 degrees. Hopefully, your body will work really, really hard to keep it at 98.7.
So you could show this to a child, or they could actually sensorially feel this if it's hot and they start to sweat. Right.
It would be so fun to take your temperature when you're like out in the cold versus
in
the warm.
Because your body, and this is going to lead. So you're not necessarily going to introduce this concept of warm-blooded and cold-blooded, and the snake lies in the sun in order to warm itself, and that's how it regulates, versus the human has other sort of processes to allow it to maintain a balance within some level of weather extreme. Like if it's hot, we'll sweat, and if it's cold, we'll shiver. Those sort of bodily processes that we have. But going back to this whole living and non-living thing, that's where you're starting, right? You're starting with the definition of there are things that are living, there are things that are non-living, and we're going to define it and we're going to experience it. And then we're going to start to categorize it based on our understanding of it. And over time, well beyond the primary years where they're doing this first kind of more basic sorting activity of non-living and living, they're going to continue to grow and think deeper and deeper about these questions. I'm going to be honest, I still do not know how to classify a virus.
Yeah, neither do biologists sometimes. Like if you look, there's still debate. Like, is a virus alive? Well, they can definitely reproduce, but they can't do some of those other things that we just mentioned, right?
Exactly.
And they're definitely organized, right? But they definitely respond to stimuli. But like there's some things that they just can't do for themselves. That, so yeah, I don't know. What do we do with viruses?
So that question and giving kids the ability to start to think deeply about that begins now with this particular foundational
when your
question.
Child
when your child is
like
what,
2
3
or 3.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, super, super young. So so the lesson is super fun. It's a really classic Montessori lesson. We just gave you a little introduction because this is where you're headed with it.
That's right.
This is why we're introducing it when the child is so young. And what we want to lead them towards is to ask these questions. What does it mean to reproduce and to go out into the world and like discover all these characteristics and details of living things?
Yeah, is the leaf alive? And then does it die when it falls? Is it alive on its own, or is it part of the tree? So these kinds of big questions, that's exactly what you want to inspire in a child.
It is. But before you do that, you want to make sure that you are not confusing at first. We want to make sure that things are really, really clear and very simple.
That's right.
So we're just going to take all of those I wonder questions and just kind of think, okay, they're all kind of existing out here in the world, and these are all the things that we're going to discover. But what I'm actually going to teach my child is this very concrete lesson. What is alive? What is living? What is not alive? All right. So I have here a plant. This is this is a really cool example because this is a spider plant, which actually you can see, and I'll just gently take this out because I need to transplant it anyway. But you can see that it's actually making babies like right here.
I feel like this might be an example of life. Actually, it's important. This is its repeat. It's a returning guest, the spider plant, because it was also in our essentials.
I don't remember that.
Yes, our plants are one of our essentials.
So. If you want to see this little spider baby again,
you can its debut performance.
So I need to I just need to transplant this little guy. That's on my list to do. So we'll do that after this live. But yeah, so it probably would be a good idea to have like a plant or something that is living in your home that you can have this conversation with on a concrete way at first. And I also have here on the windowsill a rock because I really love rocks. And so it might help at first to just have like two very concrete examples of something that is alive and something that is not alive. So that you could actually just have a conversation with your child about, how do we know that it's alive and how do we know that this is not alive, because, to adults, you look at this stuff and you're like, well, clearly this is not alive. And clearly this is, the plant itself. But we generally don't really think about the details of how you would know that. And so I guess the point really is that children don't know. Very young children, they don't know what is alive and what is not alive.
And with that plant, I mean, that's a great, grab that plant again. Yeah. So what's great about this example is if I were looking at this goes to your point about simplifying it and taking all those awesome I wonder questions and sort of putting them off a little bit, because getting down to the specifics, this rock seems to have as much energy and movement as this plant, right? I cannot watch this plant move any more than I can watch. And it's got to be partly confusing because, at least in English, the word alive, live, living, the word alive means lively movement, things like that too. Well, this plant's just sitting here. How could that be alive and this not to be alive?
Right.
So that's where the isolation down to something very specific becomes really important, like building a framework of understanding.
Yeah. So for the lesson, so you're going to start, I would start with two objects, one that is living and one that is not living. And it could be anything. If you've got a hamster at home, you could use a hamster. You could use, plants are kind of easy. Hopefully you have those around the house. But I would just use something really, really simple, like a plant and a rock. And these you're just going to identify. And what really helps, and you don't have to have these in this form like we do, but some labels. All right. So you're going to have the labels living versus non-living. And you can make these at home. This is kind of a Montessori thing to have labels for things. We are exposing children. I see some good questions in here.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. And I have feels on this. Okay. So we've got living, we've got non-living. This is a Montessori thing to give our children lots of environmental print, is what it's called. So if you look up anything about literacy and early childhood, you're going to see a lot about environmental print. This is environmental print, and we like it in the form of labels often. And that's why labels and cards, but you can make them You can make them yourself.
Oh
You
yeah, it's
just
super easy.
get a piece of paper and just write the word living on one, non-living on the other. That is how we did it with our own children at home. And then you've got two categories. You're going to hold the non-living.
Yeah.
And so then at first, the very first part is really, really simple. You're gonna put the rock under the label non-living or above it, either one, and you're gonna take the plants, and it is living. So either way. Whatever works for you, you're going to do this on a rug, right?
Yes.
So whatever works, you're just going to associate. Yep, this is living, and this is the word that says living. This rock is not living. It's non-living. It doesn't move around, doesn't eat, doesn't make babies.
Doesn't make babies. It doesn't consume energy.
Nope, it's not living. And so you're just identifying with labels. And then after this stage that is very concrete, and you could even do this part. Hopefully you're doing this verbally anyway.
And this is also the kind of thing you might be doing as you're taking that walk in the woods, right? And you're surrounded by things that are living or non-living.
So after this stage, you can use pictures. Okay, so here is a picture of a rock, and David has labeled this one. This is actually a picture of granite. So we're introducing some interesting vocabulary as well. And granite is a rock. It is non-living. It helps, I think, at first to have the concrete object, okay, a real object that is really living or really non-living.
Give it sensorial.
But then after your child, has made that association and you really distinguish between the two, then it's perfectly acceptable to do pictures of living and non-living objects, right? And so this is a picture that is labeled anthurium. I think you might look at this and you might say, oh, a peace lily, I think, right? That's what we usually call them. But anthurium is the scientific term. So an anthurium is living. It's a plant. It can reproduce. It gets its energy from the sun. It is organized. You could just talk about its properties like that.
Yep.
So
these are easy to make.
They are, they are. You can make these yourself. We made these ourselves, or David made these, but you can draw pictures of them. That is what I remember doing. When my children were little, just get some index cards and you can just draw pictures of things that are alive and not alive.
Yep.
And then you're going to sort them under these two categories. So on one side of the rug, you'll have living, and the other side you'll have non-living, and then you'll sort the cards underneath, and you can have as many as you want in each category. And so it's just kind of fun to pick one. Ooh, this is anthurium. Is anthurium living or non-living?
Well, it looks like a plant.
Looks like a plant. I'm guessing living. Now, the cool thing that we do with our cards, especially in our constellation program, is we really like to make them with control of error. So you'll notice that on one side is the plant, and the other side is a picture of a little flower symbol. And so in this way, we can build in control of error. So we can have the child check their work, make sure that it is indeed living.
So this is one of those things where you could put it out on the shelf and the child can go get the work and do the work on their own if they want, after you've given them the lesson.
Yeah. Okay. So the question came up, could you use toys, right? Like comparing the child to the cow toy. And will that confuse them because the real cow is actually alive? It probably depends on how old your child is, whether they can make that leap or not. I would say for your very first lessons with living, non-living, you would want to have the real objects.
So go get that cow.
Go get a plant.
Go get that plant.
Go get that plant.
And feed it to the cow.
Or go to a place where you can see a real cow, and then you give that lesson while you're right in front of the cow, right? The cow is living. This fence,
this is where petting zoos and things are awesome, right?
Yeah. And as far as you might look online and you might see some living, non-living setups with little plastic toys, like a plastic toy car versus a plastic toy cow. The fun-loving mom in me thinks that that's super fun and adorable. And the Montessorian in me is rebelling because it's made of plastic and metal, right? And so this is a very literal lesson we're giving, so right. I don't know, for some reason, a picture of a plant doesn't offend my Montessori sensibilities, but a plastic representation of a plant just makes me go like it just feels kind of, I don't know. How do you feel? Do you have those feels? No, you don't have those feels. So, I mean, that's just one person's feelings. So, would it confuse a child? Again,
No.
it
I mean, right.
right,
It could, but again, we wouldn't consider this a level 1 activity,
right,
right? So you will have already talked about living as a concept and non-living as a concept before you start to have them compare. And that's when you would do the sorting. So
right.
a toy is non-living, right? And a cow, a real cow is living. And you would have lessons that aren't comparing the two, but just sort of describing like, what is it about a cow that makes it alive? Like, can a toy cow have calves? Nope.
Yeah, but that's where I would put everything that's a toy in the non-living category,
Yeah.
because it's not a lot. It's not like, it's just not. It's not alive.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a toy, and toys are not living. So yeah, that's
Don't
my.
tell that to the children.
I see Marika's laughing. Yeah, I mean that's where Montessori just gets really fun, and where you can like pick and choose what kind of lessons you want to give to your child, and what they're ready for.
Totally.
And if it was the child's idea, to go see if you can find representations of living things.
Yeah,
And
if they went out and were hunting through
representations.
the room and they found, a toy, a little lion, and they're like, this is not, they understand it's a toy, but they also understand that a lion is a living thing. That's fine.
Yeah,
They're
you
getting
can
the
have fun
concept.
with it. But I guess I'm feeling like this lesson is really, it skews young. This is like a budding concept, that's going to lead to a lot of confusion, because, obviously when you start getting into the details, like, okay, so here I have a vase.
Mhm.
This is obviously non-living.
Mhm.
Why? Because glass cannot reproduce, can't make its own energy, et cetera, et cetera. But it's also made from rocks, or sand or
Yeah.
shells, right? We know that that's where glass comes from. And those things are not alive, but the shells come from living creatures.
Oh, right.
Those are alive. Like, what
about this? Maybe easier because so you have your planner.
Right, it's made out of leather.
Leather comes from an animal,
Right, which was alive.
But it's not alive
anymore.
No, so this is not alive, but it was alive.